Oh, okay, that was pretty cool. So what happens next?
Come on! Turn into a teacup!
Wait a minute. You mean to tell me that the season premiere are 2 separate episodes? Oh my god! Gee, this is new, isn't it? We've got 2 season premiere episodes that are part of 2 separate stories, Celestial Advice and All Bottled Up, which open up the long-awaited Season 7. How exactly do they hold up? Let's find out. First is Celestial Advice, in which Twilight and the group are celebrating a ceremony in honor of the heroes of the Changeling Kingdom infiltration. Eventually, Twilight is confronted over what lesson Starlight should learn now that she's on a higher level of status. She turns to Celestia for advice and is reminded on how she herself was sent away when she finished Celestia's lessons. And now she's worried about doing the same thing for Starlight. While trying to decide where to send her, she thinks about how every possible outcome could go wrong. But with some helpful advice from Celestia, she discovers what she must do for the best of her pupil. The episode is actually very straightforward with its concept, and it's even paced very well. And each act focuses on a different element that keeps the episode from feeling repetitive. The first act focuses mostly on the characters and how they interact with each other, and it's fairly charming. Discord is playfully unpredictable, but there's clearly a sense that he's working on restraining himself so that his antics come across as socially acceptable. The way he speaks with Twilight and teases her over what to do with Starlight is done out of much more respect while still having a snarky sense of humor to it. And due to his tricky persona, it's difficult to tell if his intention is to encourage her or mess around with her nervous mindset, which would fit his trollish quirk. This act also feels more relaxed in focusing on conversations between people at the party, and there's even some character in it as well. Trixie boasting her ego only to be interrupted by Discord, who corrects her in a snooty way, Twilight observing Starlight's social skills and finding solace in helping her become a better person while being complimented by her idol, Changelings adjusting to a different type of culture, even Celestia having a hard time giving Thorax his medal has an enjoyably silly tone to it. The second act is more focused on the synopsis as we see Twilight actually turning to Celestia for advice, which shows that she's willing to seek assistance for a helpful alternative to her situation. Celestia is also playfully quiet in taking in Twilight's nervous feelings in the matter, while still taking time to observe how Twilight explains herself, allowing her to more easily relate to her stress. But she also tries to calm her down so she'll be able to effectively decide where Starlight should go. The act is also paced greatly in that it doesn't force a whole bunch of possibilities in our faces which would have rushed the progression of the story. By only focusing on 3 possibilities, it allows the episode to focus on both the pros and the cons of each decision with an appropriate amount of time. And it doesn't overwhelm the audience, allowing them to take in what's happening more appropriately. The way Discord communicates with the other characters also show he's grown more fond of their company, thus is more lighthearted in how he plays around with his choice of words when speaking to them. As for Twilight's paranoia, it does feel repetitive as the story progresses, but it comes from an understandable place. She grew fond of Starlight's company and feels disappointed knowing that she'd have to start allowing her to think for herself while living somewhere else. And due to feeling like the situation is just being rushed onto her, it has an influence on her ability to keep calm, which prevents her from thinking more clearly. On a side note, Spike is a real joy to watch, not just for this act, but for the whole episode. He has a sense of panic while distracting Starlight from Twilight, but also appears smug and confident after succeeding in doing so, which is an appropriately restrained method for him to boast his ego. And during all of Twilight's panicking, he reassures her that nothing bad will happen in a way that feels strict and straightforward, which is pretty funny in how it bounces off Twilight's paranoia. And after Twilight learns her lesson, he continues to act smug in that it took a lot longer for her to learn than it should have. The last act opens up with Celestia bursting out in laughter due to being reminded about how silly she acted when she was deciding where to send Twilight herself, which would make sense for her given her sense of humor and more easygoing nature as a ruler. She speaks with Twilight on her level, explaining how her paranoia over sending her student off came from being worried over Twilight leaving her and believing she would be too good for her. Celestia became fond of Twilight as more than a teacher. She thought of herself as a close friend who helped her do something meaningful with her life. And she shows how much that means to her. Her fear of losing that really made her hesitant on her decision, but she realized that it was best for her in order to become a better person. This is possibly the most development Celestia's character has ever had, and it's even the closest to a Celestia-focused episode that the show has ever done. And I really appreciate how the series took time to do something like this. And it makes for a good lesson for Twilight to learn. Even if Starlight lives somewhere else, it doesn't make her a smaller part of Twilight's life. She can still guide her and be a good friend to her both in person and from afar. And that there's always a way for the two to stay in touch. And Twilight explains how she's ready to allow Starlight to look out for herself and search for her full potential without being held back. All of this is really meaningful development on Twilight's part, which unfortunately makes the ending even worse. Starlight just flat out says she's not ready to leave, which completely undermines the lesson Twilight was learning and the emotional effects that it was going for. I would have preferred it if Starlight went somewhere else. It would create possibilities for interesting stories, and it would be a welcomed change in the show's dynamic. A change that isn't highly drastic, but effective enough to show that the series is doing something different with its cast. But because the writers are still not sure what to do with Starlight, they just have her stay, which feels lazy and tacked on for the story that this episode was going for. But despite the ending, Celestial Advice is a nice episode to start off with. It has good character interaction, a good sense of development, a nice lesson, and even an effective sense of humor. That gag with Pinky setting up and cleaning up after parties was especially funny. Next, there's All Bottled Up, in which the main six are off on vacation, which leaves Starlight and Trixie in charge of the Friendship Castle in their absence. While practicing her magic, Trixie accidentally casts a transportation spell on the map, and the two have to go in search for it. During this whole endeavor, Starlight is working on bottling her anger towards Trixie's constant screw-ups, and it only gets stronger as she gets more frustrated, until it finally gets loose and invades the minds of several other ponies. While this is going on, we see how the main six are spending their time at the hotel trying to break a record for a huge puzzle. The pacing for this episode is admittedly much more buggier, and a part of it does come from how it transitions between Starlight's and Twilight's subplots. When it happens, it feels like the episode is breaking focus on something more important for something that's kind of happening in the background, and it's just less of an event than where the actual story is. The way Twilight's puzzle hunt is presented feels like it's more of a short story than something that would fit into the episode, and it doesn't have any influence on the subplot involving Starlight managing her issues. It would have been more effective if Twilight and the other girls came back while Starlight was going through this, because Twilight would understand what she was going through, and she would have been proud to see Starlight and Trixie learning something important. It's never even shown as to whether or not Starlight talks to Twilight about it later, since she tries to hide it from her. And the song feels very tacked on, like it just comes out of nowhere in the middle of the highest point of tension in Starlight's story, and it becomes way too big of a distraction, considering that it only serves as a punchline for a lame joke about knowing when not to sing. They seriously couldn't take a quarter of a second to just turn the key because they really wanted to sing a song about something the group has known for a very long time. In fact, there's an instance where Twilight literally turns a key in the middle of a song in order to open a door, so the punchline that it's going for with this joke doesn't even add up. This is something that the writers should know and learn about, as opposed to putting it in the episode as something for the characters to learn, especially if it's not really going to have an effect on them in the long run, considering how often they break into song. Also, Trixie's smug attitude and insensitivity becomes very repetitive really fast. And aside from that, it doesn't even make any sense. Considering her friendship with Starlight and how much it must mean to her, she should be more considerate over how her mistakes may be affecting her, especially knowing that she's being trusted with things during Twilight's absence. It's not funny, and it lacks the charm that it needs in order to be tolerable. She just comes across as thoughtlessly selfish the whole time, which only continues to make Starlight's situation even worse. At first I was wondering what was up with Starlight's anger taking form of a red cloud, but I figured that since her magic is at such a naturally high level, and since she's had a hard time controlling herself in the past, it would make sense for her power to manifest into a form based on her frustration. You actually sympathize with her, considering how the episode does a good job in showing how annoyed she gets with Trixie's repetitive behavior. And when she finally snaps at her, she's being honest about it and not trying to hold back how she feels, which makes the outburst feel more believable and real. And in a sense, she learns a lesson about how not to bottle up your anger and how hiding it doesn't solve your problems. You should let it out steadily before it gets too strong and know how to let it out in an honest way. Even Trixie's side of the lesson is easier to believe because she came to a realization after actually taking time to listen to Starlight. She compliments Starlight and reassures her by pointing out all of her best qualities, and she helps to calm her down to make up for her messing up. She even admits that it wasn't easy for her to accept, but doing so allows her to understand how much her mistakes were affecting someone. And the ending where they find the location of the map has a charming sense of continuity to it. This episode actually has a nice ending, but the rest of the episode feels pretty repetitive and not very focused. I feel like they put too much stock on the song and the subplot with Twilight's group on the vacation, which ultimately made Starlight's story not as strong as it should have been. I don't feel like it warrants another viewing, but perhaps there's something about it that someone else will enjoy. So, how did Season 7 open up? Well, it opened up in both a good way and a bad way. The first episode had a good story but an annoying ending, while the second ending had an annoying story but a good ending. If they wanted to split it up so that people would have something to like about both episodes, this isn't the best way to do it. The show has been on for years now, and its staff have proven that they can still do great stories. If the show is still going to be on, it needs to have a sense of consistency to it in order for its quality to stay afloat and not get stale. For now, I'll say that the premiere was satisfying in many ways, but it could have been improved in other ways as well. See it for yourself and find out how Season 7 made its first impression. MisAnthro Pony, over and out.